Springbok squad for the British and Irish Lions tour has been named. It's a 46-man squad. I've just gotten up to see what the squad was. To be honest, I thought the announcement would go on a bit longer. The announcement started here at 4:30 in the morning, so I got up at 5 thinking they'll be halfway through all the fluff by that point. But nope, sure enough, the squad's already out. They didn't muck around. So welcome change from what we saw with the Lions announcement, to be fair. Keeping it a lot more straightforward. We'll go through the squad quickly. Who's in? Who are some maybe the talking points about who's out? And yeah, you guys can let me know your thoughts on the squad. You'd have to say at a glance, it's largely 2019 ready. Same guys have been pretty much entrusted with carrying things forward, apart from the guys who have retired. Essentially, hookers, they've gone with Dweba, Marx, Mbonambi and Ntubeni. So Marx and Mbonambi were the guys who carried them through that World Cup final. And Ntubeni's kind of been there or thereabouts for a long time. And Dweba is your kind of new cap amongst these guys. I would have thought he's going to be the guy who gets a crack as part of that South Africa A squad. But I would say Mbonambi and Marx are essentially your guys, barring any injuries. And Ntubeni has been capped by the Springboks before, but I think not for quite a while. Props, Thomas, Toit, Kitshoff, Koch, Malherbe, Nché, Nyakane and Oosthuizen. Maybe, like I said, it's steady in terms of the fact that you've still got the World Cup starters in the likes of Malherbe in terms of Koch and Kitshoff. Thomas Toit was in the squad, and Trevor Nyakane was named in that World Cup squad until he got injured and had to pull out. Tendai Mtawera is the only guy who's absent. That's because he retired, so they had to replace him with somebody. The Ox is the man who gets the crack there. Oosthuizen's been capped by the Springboks before. He can play both sides of the scrum from memory and has got an eye for the try line. So I suppose that's another pretty solid pick. I feel a wee bit for Lizo Gaboka. Maybe Francois Low, but they have a lot of depth. I think it was either the Ox or Lizo, so they've gone with the Ox. That's fair enough. I had Lizo, but maybe Ox is the better man at scrum time. And Akavanda Merva's maybe the other hooker who's also had Springboks caps, who's been playing all right by all accounts. Bit of a different style guy to the other guys on the board, but as I said, they've got World Cup winners, so there's not a whole lot of stuff that's broken that you need to change. In terms of locks, they've gone with Jager, Etzebeth, Nico, Janse van Rensburg, Mostert, Ori, and Snyman. And they have essentially backed those main four guys who played in that World Cup final as well. That's Jager, Etzebeth, Mostert, and Snyman. Those guys were all playing in that World Cup final. Remember, they had 2 on the bench and 2 starting. And then you've got Nico, Janse van Rensburg and Marvin Ori, who are the kind of new additions. Ori's been capped by the Springboks before. Nico Janse van Rensburg came as a bit of a surprise to me, but there's a lot of good things talked about. They talked about him in the broadcast about having come through the system, so they kind of want to get some of these young guys in now so they are ready, not just for this tour, but for later games down the track for the Boks. There's no J.D. Schickerling, who I thought may get a crack, but he apparently got injured at the weekend anyway, but by all accounts, he wouldn't have made it because they've named a bunch of guys who've got injury clouds. The likes of Jager and Achia Snyman are both under rehab orders at the moment, but they still managed to make the squad. Jason Jenkins was another one I thought maybe might get a crack, but again, finds himself absent. He's another guy who does have Springbok caps, but yeah, it's another case of essentially if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Loose forwards, they've gone with Dan du Preez, Pieter-Steph du Toit, Siya Kolisi, Reinhard Alstad, Kwaka Smith, Dwayne Vermeulen, Marco van Staden, Jasper Visa, and Jean-Luc du Preez. The du Preez brothers recall is an interesting one because it seemed like they had kind of fallen out with Rassie's plans based on what we saw. All the du Preez brothers, including Robert, really. What we saw going into the last World Cup campaign, they did get a little bit of game time, but then were essentially kind of shown the door. They all took off to sail, and it didn't happen. But then you knew that maybe there was going to be a chance of a few guys from Sale getting calls up here, because when they asked Rassie and Jacques about a week ago about overseas-based players, they talked about some clubs being very cooperative and good to deal with, and they mentioned Sale, they mentioned Munster, they mentioned Toulouse. So as soon as they mentioned Sale, you had to be thinking maybe Akavandamova, maybe the Dupree brothers, Oosthuizen, those kind of guys. So it's maybe not a surprise that as many as they have been actually called up. Other guys are all the World Cup campaign guys. Alstart's one guy that got blooded by Rassi but never made the World Cup squad. He's been playing with Toulouse, made the final and won it the other day, so kind of makes sense. Pieter-Steph was in the World Cup final. Quacker Smith was in that squad, but he's one of the guys who missed out on that World Cup final game, but he did go to the World Cup. Van Staden has been in phenomenal form since Super Rugby unlocked, really. Someone mentioned that they used the words he's like the most direct replacement for Francois Lowe in terms of being that proper fetcher, so that would make sense if he's filling one of the guys who has retired. And Jasper Visa, I haven't seen enough of him, but by all accounts in the Premiership, he is absolutely tearing it up. I'm pretty gutted for Marcel Coetzee because I assumed him going back to South Africa was largely to play for the Springboks. He misses out. Rassi mentioned him and said, he's been not playing much rugby because he's been rehabbing from injury for a long time. Maybe they thought they've already got enough guys who are kind of 50-50 in terms of their rehab that they don't want to add another one to their mix, but he's another guy who's got heaps of experience, played for the Springboks. And with Dwayne Vermeulen now going for scans on Monday, he may be another guy who should keep his phone handy, but we will have to wait and see because he played for the Bulls, did Marcel Coetzee the other day, and by all accounts, played pretty well. Backs, maybe fewer surprises. De Klerk, Herschel, Yankees, Nhamba, and Reinach are your scrum halves. And then three of those guys went to the World Cup, with Reinach, De Klerk, and Yankees being those guys. I think Faf starts, and it's a battle for who backs up. Nhamba, I'm really pleased for. He's got an absolute bullet of a pass, one of my favourites, and he can fill in 10 in a pinch. But he's been playing second fiddle at the Sharks recently, so I thought maybe he would be on the outer, but they've given him a crack, and they've kind of flirted with a few different guys. Van Sale, Papia, and all these kind of recent years have had a few minutes, but yeah, nobody's really gotten a whole hell of a lot behind the likes of Faf de Klerk, who tends to play 70-odd minutes each game. But again, in terms of that Springboks A team, I would be very surprised if Nhamba doesn't get some serious minutes in that one. Fly halves, Elton Yankees, Andre Pollard, and Mornay Stain. So bringing back the experienced man who played the Lions in 2009 in Mornay Stain, 36 years old. Andre Pollard, your World Cup winner, and Elton Yankees is your other guy who went to the World Cup and didn't play in the final. So absolutely all about experience amongst those guys. There's no, like Robert Dupree, as I mentioned, he's one guy who got blooded and then kind of cut loose. Kerwin Bosch, maybe defensively, is still a little bit suspect. I don't know. They mentioned him as just being one of the guys who was unlucky, basically. Midfielders, Lucanio Damon Delunda, Jesse Creel, Frans Stain, Wandisila Sibilani. Again, it's your World Cup guys, your World Cup combo of Delunda and Jesse Creel. There's no Andre Esterhuizen, who a lot of people were kind of talking up, but the main guy I think people are upset about is Cordell Hendricks, but he did get special attention from Rusty in terms of the press conference where he said he's got other medical issues, so that was a bit of a question mark about him. Really pleased for Similani because he's an attacking powerhouse and another guy that I think is one to watch for the future, so good to see him get into the Springboks environment because he will certainly grow from this one. Frans Stain, his inclusion, again, another guy who played all those years ago, maybe indicates that they're going to stick with the familiar bomb squad and he can cover pretty much half the back line. Creel was obviously injured during the World Cup, so he's another guy who, in terms of his versatility, can cover midfield, wing, and fullback as well. The outside backs, Fassi, LaRue, Willemse, Colby, Mapimpi, Nkosi, Pinkler, and Speckman. It's World Cup familiar. You had your two guys, Mapimpi and Colby, on the wings. You had LaRue at fullback, who's a guy who a lot of people questioned as not being in the best form. People watching the top league have said he's not been in the best form in Japan, but Rassi seems to really rate him. Mentioned in the Chasing the Sun documentary that he was injured throughout the World Cup, which maybe explains some of his mishandling. But if you want experienced guys, there won't come many or much more experienced than LaRue. But it's phenomenal to see Fassi in the squad because he is absolutely lightning as well. Very dangerous guy at the back. and certainly a guy who needs to get some time in the Springbok jersey going forward, even if it's against Georgia or if it's the Springboks A side, in prep for going forward, because Leroux's kind of at the tail end of his career anyway. Pinkley and Speckman are also kind of good inclusions based on what we've seen of them in Super Rugby, and Speckman's been there and done it at sevens level as well. But yeah, I mean, I guess who else? Galant's been injured, so maybe he's another guy who you were never going to pick. Lades and Rule both been playing really well in Europe, but probably weren't in the conversation, I would say. Marash Tambwe was one guy people had thought about. Serfontein in terms of the midfield. Janse van Rensburg in terms of the midfield. There's a heap of guys who have obviously missed out, but it's largely solid from what we've seen with that 2019 Rugby World Cup squad, with the addition of a few guys who've been there and done it with the Springboks before, the likes of Marvin Ori, the likes of Ronald Alstout, a few guys who Russ has blooded, and a few uncapped guys as well. So it's an interesting little mix. We'll wait and see. I'm sure there'll be guys on kind of injury cover. As I mentioned, there's still injury cloud about Dwayne Vermeulen from the weekend. We've still got the likes of Jager and Snyman who are currently rehabbing. You've still got guys who are playing with their clubs overseas who need to return. Still plenty will happen between here and then, but yeah, it's now 5:50 a.m. I'm going to quickly pop back to bed, see if I can fall back asleep. Hopefully when I wake up, you guys will have some pretty insightful comments about the squad. What are you thinking about it? Are you impressed? Who are you gutted for? Who are you really pleased for? And yeah, I'll talk to you guys again soon. See you later.